What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. Just wanted to let you guys know before we get started that I am having a few internet problems today. So today is going to be a compilation of some old stories. I hope you guys don't mind that too much, but if you do, you can go ahead and safely skip this one. So without further ado, enjoy the video, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you guys for watching. So this event happened to me back when I was 20 and was going back from my aunt's house, where I'd give lessons to my little cousins each week. I was a student back then, and it happened in winter, when it was quickly dark around 5 p.m. I must also say I'm a woman, and unfortunately that's not very helpful when it's getting dark out. I was going back to the train station to take the direction home, because I lived quite a few stations away from my aunt. At that time, it was around 6 already. It was really dark and cold outside. I remember being particularly tired too, so I didn't give much attention to the direction the train I was waiting for was going to. As soon as it rolled in, I went inside. It was really crowded, so I stood up for quite some time. That didn't help much with how tired I already was. After some time, a seat finally cleared up. I snapped it up as fast as I could. I let out a heavy sigh that attracted the attention of the people beside me. I was a little ashamed by that, so I just looked down at my phone and didn't pay much attention to the others for the rest of my ride. At some point, though, I noticed the guy in front of me looking really intensely right at me. Then again, I was so tired I didn't really think much about it. I just continued watching whatever was on my phone at the time. As we rolled into a station, the train stopped, and the driver informed us that was the last stop. I had my headphones on, so I didn't hear the entire message. I thought I had to stay on the same train and it would just go back on the same line after a few minutes. While everyone else went out, I just switched places to go somewhere with no one beside me. It was a seat comfortably near the window. When the train was soon to start again, the man that was looking at me earlier walked straight into my zone and sat right in front of me. I was focused on my phone, though, and didn't pay much attention to him. It was quite strange, though. The entire wagon was empty where I was. There were tons of empty seats where he could have sat, but he chose right next to me. The train started up again, and I was happy to finally be able to approach my home. As some stations passed by, though, I noticed something odd. The stations were the ones I'd already passed by before. In fact, the train was going back to the direction of my aunt's house, not where I lived. I realized I hadn't heard the message right in the first place. I was a little bit angry because of this, but most importantly, I laughed at myself. It was the first time I was so tired I'd done such a mistake. As I was smiling at my own foolishness, I started to look around me. I saw the man sat before me. He was looking confused, while switching his gaze between me and the windows. I laughed and gave him a small smile. I thought he'd also gone in the wrong direction too, since he had been in the same train for a long time now with me. But he didn't smile back. Instead, he glared at me and got very angry. I remember getting a chill at that moment. My senses finally woke up to make me realize there was something wrong with this man. I stopped the video I'd been watching and started to think. I had two options. The first one was to just stop at the next station, change sides to take the train that would actually get me home. That was the most logical and normal option. I didn't know why, but something in my gut told me I shouldn't go home alone tonight because of the man in front of me. I decided to stay on the train instead and see if he would get off before me or not. After all, I was sure this was not his direction either. I stayed. At least 4 stations passed by, but he didn't move at all. Instead, he seemed to get much more confused and angry with each passing station. He was glaring at me a lot, switching to the windows each station, as if he was waiting to see which one I would get off on. Now he was giving me a real scary look. I tried to avoid his gaze as much as possible. At some point, he started to push his leg against mine. It's like when the train is riding fast, and because of its movements, you sometimes touch people near you and bump slightly into them when it's crowded. Him doing that was not natural, though. because the train was almost empty. After some time, I was really getting awkward. Even when I changed position to be away from him, he would constantly rub his legs up against mine. It pissed me off. I looked straight at him, and then I knew immediately I was in danger. He was looking at me with this huge smile on his face. Since he'd noticed I was now reacting, I was terrified. When the train stopped again at a station, I didn't really think. I jumped out of my seat and started to go out. He followed behind me. I was really scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want him to follow me home because I lived in a really secluded place. If he were to follow me all the way, at some point he would be able to do anything to me. Near my own home, there would be no one around to hear or help me. I was trying to think fast when suddenly I got an idea. I stayed near the train before the door closed and walked near it like nothing happened. He was still following me and looking at me, but I tried to remain calm. When I heard the sound of the door about to close, I jumped back inside the train again. Right when the door was closing, he couldn't get in on time. I saw him looking at the closing doors in shock. He looked at me like he wanted to kill me. I went back to my seat and stared out the window looking at him to see what he would do. He was so furious. I was scared he was going to break the glass and jump right at my neck. The train finally started again. It was gradually pulling away from the platform. The man was staring at me, following me with his gaze the entire time. When the train finally passed that station, I started breathing normally again. After that, I stayed on a few stations and finally got off and changed sides to take a train in the direction of my home. I was looking behind me the whole time and ran home as fast as I could. It was only when I was in my room that I fully realized what had happened. That event was really a change for me. Before that, I was really carefree when I took the train or the subway, but from that time on, I started being a lot more cautious of my surroundings, especially when returning home at night. So this happened around 2 years ago, when I was 20 years old. Backstory: I'm quite small, actually. I was doing some shopping in town alone. I remember it was a warm Sunday afternoon. People were out and about with their families, and it was quite busy in the city center. I had some free time to myself, so I decided to pay my grandma a visit. To get to her place, you needed to take a 20-minute bus ride from where I was. On to the story now. I was waiting there for my bus to arrive when I noticed a man staring at me. He didn't seem to be much older than I was. I remember he had on this very peculiar bright yellow hat as well. I usually don't care when someone looks at me, but this man was sort of looking at me like he was angry, like I had done something to offend him. Most people at the bus stop were either facing traffic or looking at the coming buses, but not this man. He had his back to the street and was just staring at me angrily. I got a weird feeling because of this. Still though, I saw my bus coming very soon and hoped he wouldn't get on as well. Of course, he followed on right behind me. I quickly slid into a window seat. Luckily for me, there was a kindly old lady sat next to me. She acted as a bit of a shield between me and this guy. The man stood next to our seat almost the entire ride, except for occasionally pacing around a couple of times. I was already quite freaked out by his behavior. I was texting my at-the-time boyfriend throughout the event. While he hadn't actually done anything to me, I was getting a really bad gut feeling about this guy. A few stops before mine, unfortunately, the old lady had to depart from the bus. At this point, the man's behavior became even stranger. He sat down next to me, of course, which made me tense up right away. I refused to even look at my phone or text anyone in case he saw me typing something he could use to look me up later. I think he sensed he was making me tense up. He got back and went to standing next to my seat and staring at me. My stop came and I waited to the very last moment to get off. Of course, he also got off as well. What followed confirmed he was indeed after me. I guess in an attempt to put me off again, he ran ahead of me on the road, glancing back the entire way. Luckily for me though, him doing so gave me my only out from the situation. If he would have kept walking behind me, I would have been forced to either make a run for the apartment door and hope I was fast enough to close it before he got there, or run in a random direction and hope I reached a safe place before he did. I was out of the city center now, and there weren't many people around to help me. Because he decided to run ahead and wait for me though, in that split moment I decided to turn around and run in the other direction and dial my mom. It was pretty bad, but I decided to call my mom in case anything happened to me, so she would know who it was. I told my mom what was happening. Down the road, I spotted this small burger place. They would surely have a security guard. My mom told me to run for there and tell them what was going on. I ran as fast as I could. I saw the man had now turned around and noticed me going the other direction. He began fully sprinting after me. I was almost ready to cry. Luckily, I reached the burger place before he caught me. From the window, I could see him sprinting across the road. I guess him seeing me get into the place, though, threw him off. I have no idea why he fixated on me, why he seemed so angry, or what his plans were if he caught me, and I'm not sure I want to know. In 2010, I was living in Quincy, Massachusetts with my husband, a new baby, and a roommate. It was a Saturday, so I was taking a much-needed break from the little one and went to run some errands and have some alone time. My first stop was to the local Radio Shack to get a phone accessory. After my purchase, I walked out in deep thought about my to-do list, enjoying being Sans baby for a day, when a voice broke through my reverie. Excuse me, miss, could you help me for a moment? I blinked in confusion and looked over at the man who just addressed me. My first impression of him was Italian grandpa. Everything about him was beige. His khaki slacks, his cardigan and tweed flat cap, his sandy-colored mustache even. Even the car he stood next to, a boat-sized town car, was a similar color. I hesitated a bit. As a big believer in the golden rule, I generally tried to help people out whenever I could. But this time, something about this situation gave me a bit of pause. I stood there in the middle of the parking lot. What did you need help with? I asked. The man smiled warmly. I think there's something wrong with my car. He held out his key fob. Whenever I click my car key, the door locks won't lock. It's very strange. You probably know more about this stuff than I do. Can you come over and take a look for me real quick? He gestured over to his car and clicked the fob in demonstration. Still hesitating, I said, I don't know anything about cars. We're right here at Radio Shack, though. Maybe they can help you out. No. I think we can figure this out together. Come on, give it a quick look. Again, I repeated I didn't think I could help him. I could see he was getting very agitated, and yet he continued to force a smile. He walked over to the back of his car and popped open the trunk. Here's the strangest thing, though. The doors don't lock, but the trunk still will. He started waving at me eagerly. Come on, come take a look. I began to feel very confused. Part of me wanted to go over and help still, but my greater instincts prevailed. I began to walk away, repeating over and over to the man, I can't help you, just go inside and ask for help. As I started to walk away, I saw him throw his arms up in anger. He slammed down the trunk, hopped in his car, and drove away. I drove on to my next errand, feeling very unsettled. As I tried to process the encounter, I began to have doubts about my reaction, though. Maybe he really was just an old man that needed help. Did I do the right thing? When I returned home, I shared the encounter with my husband and roommate. I expected they'd laugh and assure me I was being overly paranoid. Instead, they looked at me with wide eyes. Apparently, this is a very common plot to try and kidnap someone in the area I'm from. I didn't report the incident to the police, as I didn't get useful information regarding the license plate number. I didn't think a man asking for help with his car counted as harassment in the moment. On a lark, I decided to Google attempted kidnappings in Quincy in hopes that my search would turn up empty, that this would be a truly innocent, if awkward, encounter. Imagine my dismay when actual articles talking about this sort of thing popped up. I found a particular one and immediately recognized the perpetrator as that same man from the Radio Shack parking lot. A follow-up article revealed he actually lived in my old neighborhood. I often wonder if I was one of his first attempts at kidnapping, and what would have happened to me if I had gone over to look in his trunk. Hey guys, before this first story gets started, I wanted to go ahead and let you know that there is some animal cruelty and animal death in this first story. So if you're not comfortable with that sort of thing, you can go ahead and take a look in the comments or the description below, and there will be a timestamp for you to skip ahead to the second story. So go ahead and do that if you're not comfortable with that sort of thing. Thanks for the understanding. When I was 16, I got my first job at a local fast food restaurant. Of course, since I was in school during the day, I had to work a second shift job. I was hoping that by working, I would be able to save up some money to buy my own car. Until then, however, I had to walk home to the restaurant when I got off work. It really wasn't that bad, since the restaurant was in the town I lived in anyway. The walk was maybe a little over half an hour or so. The only bad thing about it really was that I had to walk past this lightly wooded area that always gave me the creeps. It was pretty dark as well and not fenced off, which made it even freakier to me. Both of my parents worked early in the morning, and even if they didn't, they likely wouldn't have come to pick me up anyway, since it was such a short walk. One Friday night in the middle of summer, I had just gotten out of work. It was around midnight, since the store had closed at 11 p.m. I got everything cleaned up and began my walk home. It was a really nice night out actually, as I was walking along the town street. The sky was extremely clear, and I found myself constantly looking up at the constellations. They were particularly bright tonight. I was looking forward to arriving home and taking a long shower, then maybe playing some video games before going to bed. I did begin to get a little apprehensive though, as I walked by that wooded area. It was right by a road that led away from the main town road and off to a housing area that I lived in. It wasn't even that far to go really. It bugged me though because there were no street lamps at all in that area. It got very dark very quickly, and I wouldn't get light again until I turned onto the next street where the houses were. I made the turn onto that dark wooded street and tried my best to pace myself as I walked along. Hurrying surely wasn't going to help me. For some reason, I found I always got a lot more frightened whenever I tried to run or hurry. Not sure why. I guess if someone saw me running, I would have been quite humiliated. 16-year-olds really shouldn't be so scared that they try to run down the street though. That's what I told myself. It wasn't like anyone would have seen me anyway being so late at night, but for some reason right now, I still felt like I was being watched. "Hey, kid!" I heard a voice off to the side of me call out. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It took everything I had in me not to just take off running down the road. Turning around though, I looked and didn't see anyone there at all. All I could see was a bunch of wooded area and trees. As I was trying to look a bit closer, a man suddenly stepped out from behind one of them. I kid you not. He was dressed exactly like a ringmaster from a circus. He was wearing a black top hat and a red jacket with white pants on. He was very neat for having just been in the woods, and he had this big smile plastered across his face. Hey there," I responded. I shuffled on my feet, not really knowing what to do. "Come over here, kid," the man called to me. "I want to show you something." I didn't really want to go anywhere near this guy. He didn't make any moves toward me, but he was really creepy. Sorry, I'd best be on my way home now," I told him, and started to walk a little quicker down the street. "Come on, kid, it'll only take a second. I want to show you something real cool." Now, I know that everyone reading this will just think it would have been stupid for me to not keep walking, but I'd never really been good at conflict, and I didn't know how to feel in awkward situations either. I motioned again I was just gonna walk home. Once again, the man gestured for me to come to him and indicated he really wanted to show me something. Against my better judgment, I found myself turning over towards the man. I figured if I just waited there, I could tell what he was up to without getting too close to him. He noticed that I had walked slightly towards him, and his already wide grin grew even wider. I didn't plan on going any further than this though, just close enough to see what it was he was supposedly trying to show me. I wanted to stay as far away as possible. I stopped a fair bit of the way across the street from the guy. "Come on, kid, come closer. I need to show you something." "I think you can show me from where I'm standing," I told him. I was being foolhardy, I admit, but I could still draw the line between foolhardy and completely dumb. The man looked very disappointed, but his smile only faltered a little bit. It didn't fade completely. "Alright, well, I suppose that's close enough. I'll go get it." The man walked back behind the tree line and was out of sight for a moment. I thought about just leaving while he was back there, but I just stood there, afraid to move. The man was only gone for a moment, but when he came back from behind the tree, he had something vile in his hand. It looked like he had sewn the top half of a dead chihuahua onto the bottom half of a fish, and he didn't do a good job at it either. It was covered in dried blood, and one of the dog's eyes was hanging out of its socket. The man smiled at me. "I found a Fiji mermaid." I took off and ran my butt off. I didn't stop until I got home. Rather than save it for a car, I used my money to buy a bicycle so I could ride home instead. One of the worst decisions I made in my entire life was on the commute to my college. At first, it seemed like a really good idea, as I drove 5 miles to the train station to take it into the city. I could do any last-minute studying on the train, which I took much advantage of. Once I got into the city, I'd just take the bus to school. It sucked having to get up so early to do all of this, sure, but it was worth it in the end. Or at least worth it up until the worst thing happened. My car stopped working. I didn't really know enough about cars in order to fix it. I also didn't have enough money to take it to a mechanic either. Even worse, I didn't have any family in the area that could loan me money or drive me over to the train. I was also past the point where I could drop any classes either. If I didn't find a way to get to school, I would be failing them this semester. After racking my brain about how I was going to get there, I realized I really only had one choice now. I would have to get up earlier in the morning and just walk on over to the train station. Walking 5 miles was not the biggest steel rally. I could easily do 7 at the gym on the treadmill. But walking along the side of the road where people drive along was much harder than walking or running on a treadmill in a gym. It wasn't like in class where it was just 5 miles one way. It would also be 5 miles home after school. But I didn't really have a choice now, did I? The first few days were not that bad, really. Although when I got home at night, my feet were like lead bricks in my shoes. By the time the first week came around, it was beginning to get to be too much. I had one late class on Thursday, too, which meant I would be walking 5 miles in complete darkness. At least it would be somewhat easier than walking with the burning sun, I supposed. When I got out of the train that night, I set out to walk home like usual. My feet were already throbbing and sobbing before I even got out of the parking lot. There weren't many cars in the road, which I actually found to be quite a relief. It was sort of embarrassing to have to be walking home alone like that. After I'd gotten about a mile down the road, though, I was feeling pretty terrible. What seemed to be the best possible thing happened right at that moment. A black luxury car pulled off the road and onto the shoulder. The driver rolled down his window and asked me if I needed a ride. I was so happy and relieved. I, of course, accepted. He motioned for me to hop in the passenger side. I went and got in, and he had me buckle up my seatbelt before he drove off. Although I really appreciated this ride, I had to admit the whole situation was rather uncomfortable. Being in the car with someone I didn't know at all. He was actually much bigger than me too. It was not a pleasant feeling. The man asked me where I was going, and when I told him, he nodded. He asked me what I was doing walking around so late at night in the middle of nowhere. I explained my whole situation to him. He nodded. He knew where we were going and told me he had been in the area for quite a while. After this short talk, the man basically stopped talking to me altogether. He just stared straight ahead and didn't speak another word to me. It was kind of unnerving, actually. I felt like I should try to talk to him at least a little bit, considering he was doing me a really huge favor right now. But it seemed like he didn't want to have anything to do with me. Therefore, I just kept quiet and looked forward the entire rest of the ride as well. Though very short, it was dreadful. It seemed like much longer than a 4-mile drive. I lived down a road with a few other houses on it, and everyone had already gone to bed by the time the car pulled up. I pointed my house out to the man. He drove me to it, but stopped before he got to the driveway. When he pulled over, I was very eager to get out of the car and be on my way. I grabbed my book bag with my right hand and was about to get out when the man finally reacted to me. After I opened the latch, the man, who was absolutely huge, reached over with his right hand and gripped my wrist tight. He grabbed it so hard it actually started to hurt a lot. I cried out in pain. I looked over to the man, who I now saw had a completely crazed look in his eye. I asked him to please let go of me, and he just began to laugh at me. I struggled against him, and he held me very firmly in place. I was freaked out now. I wasn't sure what to do in this situation. "Please stop it," I asked the man. "The ride wasn't free, you know," was all the man said. To my horror, while he still held my wrist firmly, probably giving me bruises, he did something even more terrifying. He reached down with his left hand, and he slowly undid his fly. My eyes grew as large as plates while I watched. The guy reached into his pants. I yelled at him to stop and tried to tell him I wasn't gay, not that it mattered at all. I also tried yelling for help, but the houses on my street were so spread apart it was unlikely anyone would come to my aid. With strength much greater than mine, the man started moving my hand closer to him. I kept on trying to pull away, using every bit of strength I had. It was really starting to hurt now with how firmly he was holding me. I dreaded the idea of even having to touch this guy, but not knowing what else to do, I did the only thing I could think of. I was still trying to pull away. Part of the strength was used to keep trying to move my wrist down as well. In a flash, I shifted my force downward, along with the force he was already using to move my hand. It ended up with him slamming his own fist right into his balls so hard that he yelled and let go of my arm. I was pleased. Thankfully, I hadn't had to come into any kind of contact with him. I immediately grabbed my things and jumped out of the door and made a mad sprint to my house. As I tried to grab my keys out, I looked behind me. I saw the man struggling to get out of the car as well. Fortunately, I was able to get my keys out and get in the house before the man could get to me. I grabbed my phone and screamed that I was calling the police. He hopped in his car and took off like a bat out of hell. I breathed about 20 sighs of relief in that moment. The following day, I put up an ad on a school bulletin board advertising for a rideshare on the way home. I found one so quickly, in fact, that I kicked myself for being stupid and not having simply done that before. I guess it's important to know I'm a female before going any further into this story. I had a bit of bad luck when I bought a battery for my last car. No more than a month after I'd purchased it, the engine somehow got a crack in it. I couldn't afford to fix it at the time, and honestly, the car was so old anyway, it probably wouldn't have even been worth the money to do so. It wasn't like I desperately needed a car at the moment, so I wasn't in too much of a hurry to get it replaced right away. It did bug me, however, that I'd recently paid $80 for a car battery that could no longer be used. Because of this, I decided to put that battery up for sale on Craigslist. I didn't get too many bites on it though until I lowered it all the way down to $30. It seemed like a big waste, but I guess it would have been an even bigger waste to not get anything for it. A guy who lived much closer to Chicago than I did answered the ad. He told me he would drive up to the town I lived in to come get the battery from me. I got my multimeter out because I wanted to show the buyer that the battery was still in good shape. Then I waited for him to show up. Honestly, I was nervous about the entire thing. It was so much more personal than selling something on eBay. In fact, I'd only ever sold things on there because it was so impersonal. With eBay, no one ever had to come to my house to pick something up. I was kind of uncomfortable knowing someone would actually have to come to my home. It took the guy an awfully long time to get there, too. I was waiting nearly 2.5 hours for him to make a drive that should have taken less than 40 minutes. Of course, when the guy finally showed up, he gave me the creeps right away. He pulled up in this rickety-ass pickup truck that looked like he'd pulled it straight out of a hillbilly horror flick, and he looked just as bad as his truck did. It was almost impossible for me to tell how old he was. He was dressed very shoddily and looked and smelled like he hadn't bathed in over a year. The moment he saw me, he started giving me the eye. You know, the once-over. You know it. You name it, and he was giving it to me. He didn't shy away from making it very obvious he was interested. The man walked up and I took out the multimeter because I wanted to show him the battery was still working fine. He told me I didn't really have to do that, but still I insisted. He made me very uncomfortable, and I wanted to have as few reasons as possible for him to try and come back. I took the meter. The battery registered as over 12.6 volts, indicating that everything was fine. The entire time, though, I could see this man was paying much more attention to me than to what I was doing. The man then had the nerve to try and talk me down from the $30 I had on the price. He told me he had driven a long way through traffic just to get there, and it had cost him a lot of gas and money. I insisted, though, that 30 was the absolute lowest I was willing to go. I was already losing money on this. That's when the man winked at me and leaned in. Well, maybe I could work the rest of the money off another way. Never before had the words, "I'm not gay, but I guess I'll learn," wanted to come out of my mouth so badly. Instead, I politely declined and did everything I could to get the man to just leave. I decided the only way I was going to get away from this was to simply walk away and see what happened. I went into the house. The man actually stood outside for several minutes before he got into that disgusting truck and drove off. I was relieved he was gone now. Now I would never have to see this creepy guy ever again. At first, I thought maybe I was just being too hard. Maybe I judged the guy too much based on his looks alone. His attitude later changed my opinion, though. I was not being hard on him at all. In fact, I was being quite easy. The guy was a creep. About 2 hours later, my cell phone blew up. I looked and there was a notification that I got an email from the guy. It read, "The battery was dead. Gonna bring it back for a refund." The battery had most certainly not been dead. He knew it and I knew it. I realized the only reason he was claiming it had to be because he wanted to come back and see me again. I texted him that I wasn't comfortable with him coming to my house. Besides, he saw the test and it had worked just fine. I sent the email and waited for a response. I didn't get one. I was quite relieved because the creep must have realized his ploy did not work. A few weeks passed by after, and I pretty much forgot about the encounter. I was really craving some ice cream and thought I'd stroll on to the gas station and get myself an ice cream sandwich. Yeah, it was really dark, but I'd made that walk hundreds of times before. It wasn't too big of a deal. I got my ice cream bar and left the gas station. While I was walking home, I walked along the main road until I got to the entrance to the subdivision my house was in. I froze when I turned onto that street and saw that same old truck that creep had driven several weeks before. This time, though, he wasn't in it. It was parked off to the side of the road, but it was undoubtedly his truck. I started to turn around and walk back to the store when I realized I didn't know if that man was in front of or behind me. I looked back and forth, freaked out and confused as to what I should do. Finally, I realized I had only the choice to go forward. I cautiously crept past that truck, my eyes darting from side to side as I expected something to happen. When I was just past it, I kept shooting glances back behind me to see if he was following me. I was agitated the entire walk home. Rather stupidly, I decided not to bring my cell phone with me this night, so I couldn't call anyone for help, and I couldn't use the flashlight either. Walking down the street towards my house in the darkness was the worst part. When I got closer to my home, I noticed that something was amiss. I ran up to the house, only to find my front window had been smashed in by something. Freaked out, I ran around to the door, which was still locked. When I went inside, I saw what had been used to break the window was the same car battery that guy had taken with him. There was a note scrawled to it, which read this: "I've been watching you every day for 3 weeks, and I'm gonna get my money back for this dead battery before I rip the hell out of you." Scared to death, I went and grabbed a knife out of the kitchen, then proceeded to call the police. They got there before anything happened, but the truck had already left by then. I felt stupid for not taking down the license plate, because all I had was an email and that wouldn't do any good. The police couldn't do anything. That happened about 3 months ago. I kept on wondering what was going to happen to me, and if I would ever see that man again. Whenever I'm in my house, I keep the kitchen knife with me just in case. My last experience on Craigslist was not a particularly nice one. The last time I used it to sell something, I had to phone the police because the man kept showing up to my door, asking for anything else I had for sale. I only sold a few items, but he always just kept appearing around my property. That's a mistake I made when I gave out my address. I needed to sell some baby clothes now though, since my daughter had outgrown them. I had stopped using Craigslist around this time and found a new app instead. I posted them on OfferUp and got a lot of offers. Mostly they were no-shows, until Wednesday, when I got a message from another person asking about the clothes. I agreed to meet them somewhere nearby. It seemed they were only 2 miles away. That's the beauty of this app, you see. You get to see who's close by, and you also get to see a face because you can log in through Facebook. Anyway, I agreed to meet at a Toys R Us store in the parking lot. As I was waiting, I got a message through OfferUp. Another good thing, I didn't have to give out my phone number on this app. The car that pulled up was not what I had expected. There were 5 people stuffed into this car. I expected the woman to get out because that's who I assumed wanted the clothes. Instead, she just sat there, staring at me, then looking to each of the other people. She didn't get out of the car. Instead, it was a buff 6'5" dude, all tatted up and bald with a nasty goatee. He walked right up to my window and asked if I had the baby clothes. I'm a very small woman, and I didn't have any protection on me. Imagine this guy approaching me. He proceeded to jiggle the handle of my car, asking me to hurry up and show him. I was terrified at this point. Like, what the fuck? Don't just touch my door. He did it again, though, and I politely told him to just step back and give me a moment. As I opened the trunk of my car to retrieve those clothes, the next thing that happened surprised me. As I went around back to retrieve them, I was shoved face first into the trunk of my own car. "What the hell?" I yelled, as the man proceeded to shove me into my car trunk. It felt like someone else was behind me as well. I heard the rustling of bags and someone else taking the clothes. I heard the big guy telling whoever was with him to hurry up. I yelled as loud as I could for help and tried to get the license plate number as well. The description of the car was an old Honda from the early 2000s, green with tinted windows. My baby clothes were gone as well. I filed the police report and told them the make and model of this vehicle. I also gave them the Facebook profile of the person who had asked about the clothes. When the police followed up with me, they'd arrested 3 people, including that big ignorant ass that took my baby clothes. The clothes were never recovered, and I have yet to get back on OfferUp. It seems like I just can never get a break on these things. Please be careful when you use these sorts of services. I'm not saying don't use them at all, but I've had some pretty rough experiences. There's a lot of shady stuff going on there. I guess the good thing is it's easy enough to be traced if you sign in through Facebook. Before I start, let me just say this story is pretty weird. I needed a TI-84 calculator for my college statistics class. The damnedest thing is that they're really expensive, so I decided to go ahead and purchase one on Craigslist. Looking through all the ads, I finally found one that seemed almost too good to be true. A guy was selling a relatively new one for only $40. I immediately emailed the seller and was happy to see the calculator was still up for sale. I asked when I could come by and get it, and the seller said right away if I wanted to. He gave me his address and I headed off for his home. The house itself was quite a bit of ways out of town. I'm in a college town in the middle of a bunch of cornfields anyway, and the place I drove to was an old farmhouse sitting there alone. This person had a nice big yard, and there were cornfields all around as far as the eye could see. I drove up the needlessly long driveway and didn't see any vehicles there. Apprehensively, I got out of the car and walked up to the porch and knocked on the door. I had to knock on it several times. After I did, the door was finally answered by a guy who looked like he belonged working in the carnies, rather than living out on a farm like this. He was tall and skinny with pallid skin and dark eyes set back in his sockets. He looked at me for a few moments and kept rolling his tongue around in his cheek. Yeah, I'm here about the calculator," I said. The man just kinda gave me an odd look before nodding. He held it up and let me look at it. It looked pretty great, honestly. I turned it on, tried it out, everything seemed to work perfectly. I took the money out to hand to the man, only for him to act as if he'd just remembered something. "Oh, sorry, I forgot to get the cover. Why don't you come on inside for a moment and I'll grab it for you?" This was pretty odd. I didn't want to just go into this guy's house. The guy was kind of being weird. Looking past him into the home, I could see it was quite dirty and unkempt as well. I declined, but the man insisted. "Come on, no reason to stand out here in the cold. It'll just be a moment so I can find the cover." Cold? I thought it wasn't even remotely cold outside. It was creepy enough being asked to enter the home for something as simple as a calculator cover, but his excuse made it that much worse. No thanks, it's okay. I'll just wait out here." I told him I could just play here for a moment. At first, the man just kind of stared at me with his dark eyes. Then he reached out to grab the calculator out of my hand and slammed the door right in my face. Needless to say, I was extremely confused. I had already paid for the calculator. Was he just not going to give it to me? I stood there for a few moments, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, he opened the door again, holding the calculator with the cover on it this time. He held it out to me. When I didn't move, he got very impatient and started to growl at me. "Well, take the damn thing, you just paid for it." I took the calculator out of his hand, and he slammed the door right in my face. Happy to be out of conversation with this person, and eager to get away as fast as possible, I turned away. As I turned, though, I caught a glimpse in the window and saw that he was not alone. There was a person who had been hidden just out of sight, and they were arguing about something. I'd had enough, though. I ran to my car and left. When I got back to my room, I decided to try this new calculator out. I hoped that the guy hadn't gotten so angry he'd broken it or something. I turned it on. Now, anyone that has used this calculator knows you can type in letters as well as numbers, and whatever you put on the screen will come right back on once the calculator is turned on after sleep mode. When I turned the calculator on, it seemed there was a message for me. The man must have written it when he was inside looking for the cover. "If you had come in, you'd be dead right now. Enjoy your calculator."